Welcome to Mind Your Wedding Business Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Dennis. In addition to leading the charge at Wedding IQ, I also run Fantasy Sound Event Services, a lighting and entertainment company based in Livermore, California, that I founded over 35 years ago. Each week on this podcast, you'll hear thought-provoking and empowering interviews with wedding professionals who have found success in the industry. If you're a business-minded wedding pro who loves love, but also cares about their bottom line, buckle up and get ready to learn from a new industry expert each week. All right, folks, welcome to the 25th episode. Maggie, you're on the 25th episode of Mind Your Wedding Business. Yeah, so today it's a little celebration. So thank you for being here. We're now at the end of January, so we've been trugging along, but I'm excited that you're with us on the 25th episode. But Maggie's here, and she's going to be talking to us about mastering venue management and the power of the preferred vendor list and beyond. So Maggie, tell us a little bit about yourself and how did we get here today?
Oh, okay. All right. I would say I kind of started in facility operations management when I was at Paramount Pictures in the 90s, moving through marketing at CBS and then a safety manager at a gym in Oakland and managing catering in a venue in Berkeley, then the San Francisco Film Center, and now here at the Lighthouse, Glen Cove Marina. I'm certified in CPR, first aid, AED. And also I'm a instructor on my CERT team, which is a community emergency response team for emergencies.
Perfect.
Lay people helping lay people in an emergency when the emergency services are overloaded. So
there you go. Well, thank you for doing that, Maggie. All right. So I feel like today we're talking about a little bit of controversialness is the preferred vendor list. It's people. I'm sure you get asked all the time by a vendor, how do I get on your preferred vendor list? Well, all that kind of stuff. So we're going to dive into that. So to start off is like, why do you think a preferred vendor list is valuable tool for the venue and for the clients?
It's definitely a valuable tool for the venue or the property because it's a curated relationship. You've gotten all their paperwork, their insurance, their certifications if it's food and beverage. You've worked with them in some capacity before, either at your venue or in industry events, and you don't need to potentially, for lack of a better way to explain it, you don't need to babysit them, right? They know the rules. You trust them. Right? Mm-hmm. Trust that they've, explained to their team what the rules and everything are. They've trained their staff and all of that. And as far as the client, generally it should be an easy lift for the client because you've already curated this relationship and they don't need to worry about these other back end or back of house items. And they should be able to focus on curating the client and their experience for the event. I always am a big proponent of expressing to clients that people aren't on our preferred list. They don't pay to be on it. And I don't believe in that per se, because anybody can pay to be on any type of list. It's all about performance and relationship. In the years past, I've had to remove people from a preferred list because of poor performance, lack of attention to detail, lack of attention to the client, and just not creating a good experience for the client or not fixing it if something went wrong. And to me, that's why we're in this industry. It's customer service and, the end result, everybody should be happy, right?
And that's one thing I think in our industry, the wedding industry as a whole, is that customer service is not something that we're good for or known at. And I feel like the businesses that are the ones that are succeeding and doing very well. So, you get a lot of weekend warriors that are in the wedding industry and they're not really. Yeah. And so therefore, if they get an email on a Monday, maybe they'll get to it by Thursday, kind of thing, where people that are in business and take this seriously are going to respond to it quickly.
At least say, we're busy, I'll get back to you, or, whatever it is. Right.
Yeah. Have it set up. So when you're curating the vendor list, what are some of the criteria and things that you are, kind of looking for?
Insurance is a big thing. Insurance certifications, if it's a caterer, do they have all of their food served safe? And if they're serving alcohol, the responsible beverage certification, all of those items. Do they train their staff in all of that? And so everybody knows what to do. And even potentially, do they know how to respond in an emergency? I mean, we had to respond to an emergency one time here this year at our property, and the catering staff was great, right? They kind of we all sort of worked in simpatico, and it was like, okay, you take care of this, you do that. Like, let's make sure nobody realizes what's going on. We don't need looky-loos. Like, the event must go on over here, right? Bartender, you keep serving, and nothing to see here. Let's just so. I think
keep moving.
That's really important.
I think so too. So
I was just going to say, so insurance, all of the insurances, liability insurance, workers' comp, like all of those things are important to make sure that your vendors have. And a couple of years ago, we had a caterer here that was not on our list. And again, we sort of in a transitional phase where we were coming out of COVID, right? And people had sort of already booked vendors. So I kind of had to work with what we already had on the book. And they were like, oh, well, we've been doing this for 20 years. We don't carry insurance. And I said, excuse me?
Oh my God. Red flag, red flag.
You will for this day. I need you to get insurance for this day, And he didn't even have alcohol liability insurance. And I was like, well, you can't set foot on this property without that. So, and they went and got it. I mean, to their credit, but I was floored. I was like, I've never heard of that before. But so there are, people out there, and with Instagram and Facebook, and anybody can start a business. And to your point, weekend warrior, right? But, and they can have great pictures, but can they perform?
Under pressure. Yeah, that's the biggest thing. So how do you maintain strong relationships with the folks that are on your vendor list?
Great question. A lot of it is just kind of keeping in touch, every couple of weeks or something. Hey, how's it going? Industry events, being part of industry organizations like ILEA or WIPA or MPI or, what have you. Because it's another good way to be in contact and connecting with key players in those companies, right? I think sometimes people like that. Okay, well, I've got the owner's number on speed dial, right? Like, if you have an issue, we're going to attend to it. And I think that gives a level of people like that, the customers, clients, if you will, like that level of security, right? Like, we've got your back, right?
Yeah, no, it's a comfort level for the venue. All right, so I'm a vendor wanting to get on your preferred vendor list. What advice do you have, not just necessarily for your preferred vendor list, but just someone wanting to get on a preferred vendor list? What kind of advice do you have for them?
That's a great question. I like that, because what I often will tell people is, send me your information. Do you have a website? And then usually what I do is I go out to my network of people and I'm like, hey, have you ever heard of this vendor before? Has anybody worked with them before? Like planners or something like that. And if nobody has and nobody's heard of you, it's not necessarily a red flag. Like, we want to give everybody, an opportunity. Everybody likes to start their own business and stuff. But if they bring us an event, for instance, like a caterer, like bring us an event, so we can see you perform. But I will be sort of I will be managing you, so to speak, not necessarily micromanaging, but I'm going to be watching. I'm going to be watching, for a level of service. I always tell people, like when we're touring clients, I'm like, well, we're not looking for like the French Laundry level of service, but this also isn't Taco Bell,
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
And when people are like, well, if there's a water, this is the scenario I always use to clients. And then for a caterer, for instance, I'm like, if you're going to set a water glass down on a table, your client's going to expect that to be filled. So if you don't provide service for that, we're going to have a problem, because grandma's going to end up asking me for water. And granted, I will go get grandma water, but I'm not going to get your 120 guests water. And when somebody asks for water and somebody goes, it's not my job, or we didn't, we're not providing that, the client didn't pay for it, whatever. No, it needs to be provided, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, and I'm a big believer that you have to have a 2 to 3 year rule. Like it takes 2 to 3 years to get on a preferred vendor list,
Right.
once the venue knows about you. And I always say, unless you have very specialized service, like we just interviewed recently on our other podcast, someone that does pet sitting at weddings. So something like that, that's easy to get on a preferred vendor list, because that's something that but if you're a caterer, a photographer, a DJ, you're one of many, you're not one of one.
Right. Or like
so
we've had babysitting services,
yeah,
I did vet a babysitting service, and they have all of their certifications, they have the insurance, they have all of that stuff, and we have it on hand, and they were starting new, and I was like, oh, this would be great for people. They're a little pricey, but I also know that they have invested in themselves in getting all of the certifications and the insurance and all of that to provide a service that's, quite frankly, it's needed sometimes if you're going to have kids at a wedding,
It's all where you fall on the food chain of your friends getting married. Are you one of the first? Well, probably not a lot of kids. If you're one of the last, there's probably going to be kids, so yeah.
Yeah. It depends what the vendor is, right? I think I've gotten, like, in the past 2 months, like 4 people that are like, hey, we have a photo booth. And I'm like, yeah, thanks. Everybody has a photo booth. I don't say it like that, but great, good for you. Because a lot of our vendors offer multiple services, and one of them is a photo booth. And I feel like a photo booth is such an easy lift these days, and not necessarily an easy lift. That may be the wrong way to say it, but a lot of people do it. And so,
well, I think it goes back to you when you mentioned networking and being a vendor, with different, associations. It's developing that relationship with you. And if I have a photo booth and I have, over the last couple of years, got to know you, you might give me a shot at your preferred vendor list if a spot opened up, but again, it's relationships, top of mind, that kind of stuff that, and Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither was a vendor list, is what I always say.
the extra mile for our clients, and not that you wouldn't do that for anybody, but I think I appreciated this property, the Lighthouse, when I came here, because I'm like, wow, as a vendor, I was looking at it through a vendor lens, and I'm like, wow, this is a great property. It's so easy to work. Like, having worked at lots of different properties and venues in the Bay Area, and we've all done the load into the elevators for high rises and the elevator breaks, or we're a long load in at a winery or some type of property where it's far out and there's no water or running electricity, and you have to worry about a generator, all of these things. It's just very user vendor friendly here, and I also try to create that environment for the vendors as well, because if the vendor if they like to work at a property and they're getting 2 bids on a day, right? And I've talked to a lot of vendors, and they're like, well, if we get 2 on a certain date or whatever, and it's between you and another property that's like a hard lift, and maybe we're not going to make as much money or whatever by, taking the gig at the Lighthouse, we're probably going to take the one at the Lighthouse, because, it makes, if the venue can make your life easy, it trickles down to everybody's event experience.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we're all on the same team. So if we have that team approach, and we're all in this together, we're a team couple, and we're there to, make sure the couple has a great day. I think that's a good thing to think about, is when the couple, I always encourages the couples to put together a good team, because when you have one bad team member, it's going to make the wedding so much more difficult and so much.
It's funny you should say that. I actually, on our tours, I sort of incorporate that. I'm like, well, the reason we have our curated list is because, and I always say, hey, are you a sports fan? What's your sports team? That kind of thing. And I'm like, you can have the greatest athletes, right? But if they don't play well in the sandbox, or they don't gel, they're not a winning team. And I go, it's the same thing for an event. Event is like a game, right? It's game day for us, right? We're planning for it and everything, and we have a game plan going in, and we all know that those game plans, sometimes they change. Something's late, the ceremony goes late, whatever. And you have to be able to pivot and adjust. And if you have vendors that are curated and they work together well, and again, sort of they don't need babysitting. Sometimes I have some vendors, we don't even need to speak. We can just look at each other and go,
Yep.
like, did you see that? Okay, I'm on it. You know what I mean? And so that's, I think, really important. And we have had some clients that recognize that, which I appreciate too, when they actually realize that, all right, we listened to you, and wow, that was so easy. Like, we thought weddings were going to be stressful, and that was like such an easy lift. Like, we didn't have a care in the world. And I'm like, yes, that's what we're trying to achieve. And that is why we have the lists that we have.
Yeah, no. So, all right. So speaking of the list, I feel like they're renewable, so you're only as good as your last wedding or event, so if something were to happen and I'm able to, I have a relationship with you and there's a really good explanation, I think it's going to ease the blow and I will remain on the list. But if I did something really egregious, how do you have those conversations? And, like, have you ever had to remove someone from your list? And how does that go?
Yes, I have. And generally, I try to have sort of a debrief or after the week after the event, right? If it goes really well, I still try to check in with it, like, hey, that was really great. I love what you did. I think we have a client moving forward that would, like this type of service kind of thing. But the flip side is true as well. If somebody doesn't perform well, I like to kind of go back and be like, all right, so what went well and what didn't go so well, and give them the opportunity to acknowledge what they didn't do well.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't know and I have to tell them, well, that's another red flag. Right? For instance, we had a vendor that was on our list. I had to remove them this year. No names or anything, but
No.
they were a beverage service and they were pouring shots. And I said, we have no shots in our, thing. Oh, I didn't know. Well, that just sets me off when they say, I don't know. I'd rather you say, I forgot, or the client, it was the groom that asked, like, just be honest. Like, you didn't know, then that tells me you're not doing your job.
Or you don't care.
Or you don't care. And then same event at the end of the night when, beverages are provided by the client, they have to be packed up, right? Bars closed, done, period. No more alcohol, no self-service alcohol, that kind of thing. And my coworker, Crystal, and I are like walking through during our walkthrough, and we're like, why are people pouring themselves drink at the bar out there? Well, the bartender just cleaned up, didn't check out with us, and left the product out at the bar instead of taking it, away and back to the kitchen or whatever. And I just lost it.
I don't blame you.
I was like, this is unacceptable. What you do you not know your liquor laws, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, oh, well, we generally work at people's houses. And I go, well, this isn't a person's house. Like, on what planet, again, you're not being aware of where you're at and the property you're at. So just because you work a lot at people's houses, you're never going to work at a venue if you can't follow their rule.
No, and that's the thing as a vendor, I might not agree with all your rules, but they're your rules, and so if I want to work at your venue, I'm going to have to abide by your rules, and I think that's where a lot of vendors go wrong, is that they don't think of it as, we're a guest in your home,
Right.
and so when you're a guest in someone's home, you're not going to go stand on their chairs, and you're not going to go just help yourself to whatever you see, there's, it just,
no vendor person wants to hear, well, at so-and-so I can do. No, I don't care about that venue.
No,
you are not at that venue. You are here. This is a 114-year-old building, like that always kills me. And it's kind of like that. I'm very patient and I'm very calm. But when somebody sort of says something like that, like, oh, I didn't know, or like, I just have to kind of take a deep breath and go, what do you mean you didn't know? Did you like, did you not read? Like, I read all your contracts. Like, did you not read our rules? That kind of thing. Or like, when another thing that I always sort of judge vendors on, especially like caterers and such, is like the vendor parking is not right up front.
Mm-mm.
The vendor staff should always park the furthest away as possible. And so when I see a vendor and one of their team members or a staff member, and not like the owner or, like somebody who has to drop something off, but when they just like roll on up, park right up front and just kind of saunter in, I'm watching that. And I go back to that manager and I'm like, okay, if that was a hired staff for the day, they're not coming back here. Like, do not. Yeah,
no, it's again, we're there to provide a service to the couple and their guest. And, we need to make it as easy as possible. And moving our car to the back of the parking lot, it takes you 3 or 4 minutes, like it doesn't take long to do that, especially at your property. It takes you 2 minutes at max.
Yeah. I mean, it's at the top of the hill. It's not that far. And I always I look that person in the eye. I'm like, do you want to tell grandma that she has to walk from up there because you were too lazy to park your car up there? You're already working and walking around. I get it, but that's what this job is. And I've worked at a lot of venues, and our parking situation is pretty easy lift.
No, it really easy lift. Yeah, no, it's better than being in the city or any of the other stuff where you have
you're not even paying for parking
to a
here,
park. Yeah, and you have to move to a parking garage and all that kind of good stuff. So
yeah, all of those things I'm evaluating vendors on.
Yeah. No, and that's the thing. I feel like we're always being evaluated, and I think it's like vendors get excited. I'm on the list, so now I'm in, and so I don't have to deliver excellent.
Perform and
Correct. Yeah. No, and
you got to stay in shape.
You're only as good as your last event, and if you sucked at your last event, you suck. So that's the way I tell that to my staff, and that's what that is. I mean, and when we do have an incident or something that happens, I'm like, well, we suck right now and we need to fix it and we need to, get better,
and there's sometimes too where, during the process of a wedding, we know it's a long day, sometimes 10 to 12 hours, and something, maybe there's a hiccup in the beginning or something like that. But can you adjust and make it right? So sometimes it's not how you start, it's how you finish. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I also kind of look at that as well. Like,
I agree.
All right, we had a little hiccup going into there. I wasn't so sure, but you guys came through,
and you recovered
in the 9th inning and you hit a grand slam, great.
Yeah.
Hallelujah.
Things happen, and so it's how do you react to it? And I have a big philosophy here at what we, at my company is that we need to be on the offensive, not on the defensive. So something happens is like, Maggie, this is what happened. This is the solution. This is how we made it better for the client. This is how blah, 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 and I think that goes a long way instead of me waiting for you to reach out to me.
Right. So can you solve problems? Do you have solutions for a problem that arose? And can your team, fix something that, we certainly try on our end, but, one of my big things is my pet peeves is being on time. If the vendor's late and they haven't contacted me, I shouldn't have to contact you if you're running late. You should tell me you're running late. But I'm perpetually early for everything. And we talked about that in one of our Let's Talk Safeties. Give yourself extra buffer time because we all know that crap goes sideways sometimes. And if you have some built-in time to fix stuff, everyone's not stressed.
Yeah, it's and you as the vendor arriving at the property, you're not stressed because you're not. There's times where I'm going somewhere and I'm, I'm cutting it close and I'm stressed because I'm hitting traffic and so when I arrive, I'm not giving them my best self. So that's not
right,
and that's on me. So
100%.
Yeah. So all right, so I feel like we tackled the vendor list pretty good. So what other beyond the vendor list, what other strategies or practices have you found to be essential for delivering seamless events?
What we started here at the Lighthouse was probably about 3 years ago now, that when people book, we offer a 1-hour sort of consultation, if you will. I hesitate to call it a planning consultation because we're not going to plan your event for you, but a consultation to sort of guide couples, or even if it's not a wedding, but just an event, and we'll do a floor plan for you, because we all know in the events industry, at least on the vendor, a venue side, like a floor plan's pretty easy to do, and then it can be adjusted. but it sort of, it helps ground the client that, okay, it starts to make it more tangible. And then we also do a really quick timeline. We all can do a timeline in our heads in 30 seconds or less. It's just, it's not rocket science, right? It's half an hour for ceremony. It's hour to hour and a half for cocktail hour. If you got pictures, it's dinner, buffet or sit down. It's going to be, 1.5 to 2 hours. Speech is in there somewhere, and then dancing and dessert and whatever else afterwards. It's pretty easy from our standpoint. And it really helps the client, again, wrap their heads around the event, and also gives them a starting point when they go to the vendors for like a caterer or a DJ or services, because they're going to ask the same things like, okay, what's the timeline? When's your ceremony? So everybody, does a timeline from that standpoint. And so we sort of offer that as a guidance to start with, because it also makes our job easier. And it also makes our vendors' job easier, because that's when we understand what the client's vision is, what their budget is potentially. And a lot of people don't know what their budget is. Like, they're like, oh, we have $10,000 for food and beverage. I'm like, oh, okay, great. We can't even take you to McDonald's for that. So let's rethink that. We sort of partner them with vendors that we think are going to best fit their needs, kind of like matchmaking in a way, because you definitely want to get along with your vendors also, because it's just going to make the whole planning process of your event enjoyable. And we don't want to make it stressful.
Yeah, I agree. So can you share an example of how a well-managed venue can evaluate the overall wedding experience?
I think ultimately, if your client, I think client reviews at the end are helpful in so that if they feel like it, like I think I alluded to it earlier, like, wow, that was really easy. That was stress-free. Wow, I didn't have a care in the world. Like, I was actually able to enjoy the guests and, the whole day, right? And take all of these magical moments in. I think that's, to us, or at least our team, that means the world to us, right? Because that's really what we want. And we all know weddings, for instance, are very emotional. And there's a lot of other stuff going on, family dynamics, who knows what. But if we can make the execution of all of the details of, your caterer to your DJ, to your florist, to your event planner, or we're doing the coordination, whatever we can do to make it an easier lift for you, I think is important. And when the client recognizes that, that's always key. Now, it's hard to do that on the front end when you're like selling the property or your venue, right? You're like, hey, I can do all of this. It's not tangible to them. So I think the review from clients, happy clients, is helpful.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I know it did. Yeah. I was going to mention too that something that just popped in my head while you were talking is like, I think where vendors should be asking the venues for feedback, good or positive, because I think that's something that a lot of vendors don't do. So if I'm a vendor out there, especially if I'm one of your vendors, Maggie, and I'm asking you for feedback, and then I go and do the feedback that you gave me, and I go do it, then now it's going to just continue to cement that relationship and make us stronger in the end.
100%. I mean, and you just made me think of something too, like, as getting away from catering, for instance, but like we've had DJs come in because people are like, oh, well, we have a DJ, that we know. And I'm like, okay, great. Well, here are our rules. We're in a residential area. It's 75 decibels or less until dusk, and we design the timeline to move everybody inside by dusk. And I have we have the decibel meter on our phones. But it's good DJs that come in to do a site visit beforehand if they're not on our list, for instance, and I'm, making an exception. And they're like, oh, I see you have houses around here. What's the noise ordinance, or how does that work? And I'm like, okay, that tells me you're thinking. And that tells me that you're not going to bring and set up speakers for like
a concert,
a concert at the Open Coliseum, a Metallica concert at the Open Coliseum, right? Because we've had that before, and I have to sit there and I have to ask the DJ to turn it down. And we've had some very indignant DJs And I'm just floored. And I'm like, well, I know they're never going to come back again. So there's not even, a need to do like a debrief, right? The client picked them.
Yeah.
So, but I don't like the experience that the guests are having because, well, or even when we move inside and it's too loud, right? They bring too much speaker for the inside because you've seen the inside. It's just not needed. And like everyone's not dancing because it's too loud. We had that one time this year, and I'm like, can you turn it down? Nobody's in here.
Yeah. And I think the funny thing is that a lot of vendors don't realize is that the guests don't realize that we're not part of the venue. So when that DJ did that, and it's going to look bad for the venue, not so much for the DJ, because guests don't understand that there's so many moving parts that go into a wedding. So therefore it automatically goes, to the venue. And so now we're giving the venue a bad rap. So that's where I think that where good vendors are there for the venue through thick and thin.
Presenting each other. But to your point, and probably should have led with that, is that especially with food and beverage, but definitely with the DJ as well, the clients know that they've hired who they've hired, but the guests don't. And the guests don't know that it's not an in-house package, if you will, right? And so when you are performing, whether it's food and beverage or DJ or florist or what have you, you're representing the Lighthouse or the property or the venue, and our brand or whatever venue it is, you're representing their brand, so you are an extension of them. And so if you can't acknowledge that, and you're just and the client is obviously the number one priority, but like you're not there for you. You're there for the client and the guests, and then potentially you're representing the venue. So I think vendors that don't grasp that and don't understand that, it's hard, and that leads back to why venues like to have a preferred list, because they are an extension of the brand.
Yeah, and you made me think of something else. We're ping-ponging off each other here, but there's recently, last summer, I was working with a photographer that's not from the area, and they were doing things at this venue that I know wasn't allowed. And I'm like, hey, you're not allowed to go down those vineyards. And the guy's response was, I'll never be back. I don't really care. But then now, yeah, you're right. But then it made me think of like, so this guy's now showing photos of this couple down an area that they're not no one's allowed to go. So now this is going to get out on Instagram. This is going to go everywhere. And then now other couples are going to be like, hey, I saw this on, ABC Photography's web or Instagram. Why can't I do it? Kind of thing. And now you're just causing more stress for the venue.
That's a great point, because we did have a vendor that did that last year. Our property is a 114-year-old building, and you cannot go on the rooftop or the veranda, if you will. And it clearly says you can't go there. There is one section that we do allow, and it's just for the bride and groom and stuff. But we got the pictures back. Again, it was a photographer not from the area, and I saw the pictures, and I'm like, the whole wedding party is, they're getting ready in the morning. They're in their the PJs, the matching PJs. Super cute photo. But there's like 8 girls in the wedding party, and 8 people on the corner of the roof. Not only is it not safe, but they could have done some potential damage. And when I called the photographer, she's like, well, I didn't know, which again, we know that is not the answer that I like. I said, but there was a sign that everybody had to step over to get to where you took the picture. So don't tell me nobody knew, and it says there's a $500 fine. And I said, here's the deal. I just don't put that particular picture online, right? And the photographer, the telephone game went back to the bride, and it got to the bride like, you can't use your pictures at all. And she's like, I'm going to use my pictures. And I'm like, no. I think there's a misunderstanding. You absolutely can use your pictures. They're beautiful. I love them. You're gorgeous. It was a beautiful day. I'm just saying, don't tag the Lighthouse at that point, they're not tagging him in any of them, which is fine. But I was like, the corner that you guys took a photo that you weren't supposed to, please don't tag us in that, because to your point, I don't want people to see, because you can clearly tell it's not the area where we do allow, right? And, they got $500 taken from their security deposit, and we got a really crappy review because they were not happy about that. But it's funny because in the review, they did not mention that that was why we took the $500 security deposit at all. And they didn't mention all of the other rules that they broke, but because I could have kept all of their security deposits. So it's hard when you have a vendor, and I tell this to couples. I said, honestly, the only times we've had issues and where people didn't have a great experience or we've gotten a bad review is when people don't go off of our list.
Yeah. And it's funny. And I thinking about an experience that I had with a photographer that wasn't on the list, was from Southern California. And this gentleman knew the rules, came in, and was fabulous and was amazing, was fun. The staff loved him, and they added him to the preferred vendor list after they saw that, because it was like, this guy and they reached out to him like, hey, I know you're in Southern California. Would you want to be on? He's like, I love your venue. I would love to fly up and do weddings up there. And we worked, the gentleman retired partway or stopped doing photography, during COVID and all that. But we were working with this gentleman pretty regularly, and he was from Southern California, and we're up here in Northern California, because he provided a great experience. So,
great experience, great performance, and respect. And I think those are all three key words to take away if you want to be on a preferred list. And to your point, it takes a while. You don't just say, hey, I want to be on your list. Like, it's almost like a first date kind of thing, right?
Who are you? Exactly the analogy I use. Yeah, exactly. Get to know. It's a 2 to 3 year process. And and it's funny. I was thinking too, is like, I did a wedding in Houston for one of my former staff members, and they brought me in, and I read the venue's list, and I did everything right, and they were the same thing. Do you want to do weddings here? We love you. You're one of the our vendors don't even read the rules, and I was like, no, I'd be a little hard for me to come to Houston every weekend, but I appreciate it. But it's that kind of stuff. It's simple.
Last flight, I'll come.
Yeah, exactly. No kidding. But it's just like, just follow the rules. That's what it comes down to. You may not agree with them. Follow the rules.
And to that point on rules, I really appreciate and respect our vendors, and even a new potential planner or something that asks me a question about a potential rule. Like, hey, I see you have this rule, like, for instance, no confetti.
Mm-hmm.
I have that in there because we're an outdoor venue as well, and things need to be biodegradable. But I always say, like, ask me about let's talk about what you want to do, and let's see if we can still make it happen, right? So for instance, confetti. Great. Well, now they have this new biodegradable confetti, and one of the brides, she got this, and it was like rice paper, like you could actually eat it. But as soon as you hit it with water, it just dissolved. And I'm like, absolutely. I love that. Let's do that. Like when they, announced the couple, that was the confetti, and it was great. There was no cleanup. Right. But like, I always try to explain to people, there's a reason we have the rules we have, like inside, glitter, confetti, those types of things. They go into the AC ducts and stuff like that, and we have to vacuum them out. And it's a whole thing. But if we can do something to mitigate and achieve the effect that you want, we will try to make that happen, right? Okay, you want to do sparklers. Okay, we're in California. It's not allowed. Oh, but this venue out here does it. I'm like, that is great. You can go book with them. We cannot here. I have interviewed 3 fire chiefs, and it is illegal. I live in a residential area. If any of our neighbors see that, they will call the fire department. Do you want the fire department at your, you know what I mean? There are other really fun ways to get that sparkler effect without using sparklers, not to mention they're dangerous and you can burn somebody with them.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up I have yet to ever invest in those because they're one, no one wants them at their venue, and and I think it's more of a fad, it's not a trend, it came and gone, and all the other venues.
Another one too.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, all right, we're wrapping up. So tip, we're hitting our number here that we got to move on. But so tips, what were a couple tips that you can leave us with?
I think for vendors, developing a relationship, offering certainly to, if you bring an event or bring a client to that venue, I think goes a long way. And then just keeping that line of communication open and getting feedback after events, and to your point, 2 or 3 years to develop a relationship.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to say is like Rome wasn't built in a day. It takes time, so you got to be in it for the long haul. There's no short game in what we do. It's a long, and you got to imagine, what you're doing, and you're only as good as your last event. So if you're in this industry to make a lot of money, you're in the wrong industry. You need to be in hospitality and customer service and like what you're doing. Otherwise, and then the money will come
or something.
Yeah, no, yes, then the money will come. Yeah, no, for sure. So, all right. Well, thank you for being here. But before we wrap up, I always like to ask my guests, what's your favorite app right now that you're using?
Currently, I have to say it's ChatGPT to just sort of curate better, softer answers, because I can kind of be blunt sometimes. And so I just try to use ChatGPT to kind of soften some type of explanations or things like that.
No, it makes your emails a little softer. I think you and I, that's why I think we get along. So we're blunt. We call a spade. We call it how we see it. Yep. And so it would be nice if we could have a ChatGPT filter for our mouth sometimes. So
100%.
Yeah, I agree. So, all right, folks. Well, Maggie, how will we get in touch with you?
So we can be reached at the lighthousegcm@gmail.com. All of our pricing, facility use policies, frequently asked questions, and video are all on our website. We try to be totally transparent, and reach out to us if you have any questions or want a tour.
All right. Well, Maggie, we thank you, and we appreciate you being here talking about the controversial topic of preferred vendor lists. I mean, I felt like we could have gone on another 45 minutes, but
for sure.
Yeah, we totally could have. So anyway, all right, Maggie, thank you for being here. Thank you for being my 25th guest on the on the wonderful 25th anniversary of Mind Your Wedding Business. All right, thanks, folks.
All right, thank you all.
Bye. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Mind Your Wedding Business podcast, brought to you by Wedding IQ. I hope you've enjoyed listening to this episode. Please get in touch with me if you have a topic you would like for me to cover, or if you are in the area of your business you're struggling with, let us know. We'll be happy to help. I encourage you to check out our other episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're a fan, we'd love to hear from you, and we'd love for you to subscribe to our podcast and leave a review. It helps others find our podcast so they can learn from our guests too. Thanks again for listening.